please welcome your host, Obama Fellow, Najeen Paul Deroli.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the closing session of the Obama Foundation Summit. My name is Najeen Paul Deroli, and I am a proud daughter of Haiti. I also have the privilege of being a member of the inaugural cohort of Obama Fellows. You've had a chance to hear from some of my fellow fellows here on stage. You've heard from Ashley, you've heard from Melissa, and all of us share a belief that change only comes if we work alongside our communities in the effort. We listen. We don't impose ourselves on our neighbors. We work with them to reach our common hope we all share, that better future we all want to see. In my case, that means ensuring every Haitian has access to what our Constitution enshrined as a human right, a quality education. That declaration was made in 1806, only 2 years after the only successful slave revolt in history, resulting in the independence of the world's first Black republic. We are a people defined by liberation. Sadly, today, only about 20% of Haitian teachers are formally equipped to do their job well, and about a third of our students will get through primary school. 1% will go to college. The Ancestry movement was founded to address that. At Ancestry, we recruit local teachers and recent graduates from rural communities, from their hometowns, to transform classrooms. Our teachers are equipped as incredible civic leaders who are advocating for their students and for larger reforms. Everything we do is rooted in the power of local culture, customs, and community. Since our founding, over 85% of our students have passed on time and on grade level. That is 3 times the rural average. And by 2020, we will ignite 20,000 civic leaders for the 4 million children of Haiti. Scale for us is depth, because our roots matter. So the foundation has brought all of us, whether we come from the Caribbean, the Congo, or Columbia, South Carolina, to this place, to Chicago. This is the place where President Obama began his career in public service. It is where First Lady Michelle Obama was born and raised. It's where together they started their family. And it's where they've chosen to build their foundation and their presidential center. In today's session, you'll hear about this special place, about its history as a crucible for social change in America and its remarkable potential. You'll also hear about the power any place holds, about how deeply our homes shape our expectations and dreams. So with all of that, first up, we have Jen White, a current host at WBEZ and the voice behind their remarkable podcast, Making Obama. She'll be interviewing immigration advocate and author, Diane Guerrero, in a powerful conversation about honoring and respecting our roots. Please join me in welcoming Jen and Diane.
So I just want to start off talking about your life. You were separated from your parents when you were a young teen. When you were 14, they were sent to Colombia. You had American citizenship. They weren't able to obtain it. What was it like navigating the world at that young of an age away from your family?
It was tough. I think about it like this. When you have your parents, you have this support, so that when you're making decisions, you're making it alongside someone. Someone is helping you, giving you advice. this is what we always say, this is what we always do, these are our values. And so when a child is separated from their parents, that child has to make all of those decisions for themselves. And that's what I went through. I had to make all of those decisions for myself. And so it was hard to focus on my education, some of the things that when you're growing up, that these are the things that are going to inform the rest of your life. Your education is so important. So these things I couldn't focus on. Everything weighed so much. Every day there was so much at stake. So like crossing the street, there was so much at stake. Going over someone's house, so much at stake. Those things give you a lot of anxiety, and it's just that blueprint for decision making goes underdeveloped. And so that has affected me greatly even today.
In addition to being a very successful actress, you're also an immigration advocate. How has your personal story shaped your work as an advocate?
I gotta say that before sharing my story, before telling my truth, I was lost. And even though I had achieved some success in my choice of work, in my line of work, I wasn't going to be able to sustain that unless I faced myself and my history and who I was. And so when I did that, so many doors started opening for me. My mind expanded, my heart expanded, and here I am sharing with you all of the possibilities that can happen in your life. And so I knew that once I shared my story, it was going to be difficult because so many people can make assumptions on who you are, and only you know those things, right? But then you start connecting with others who are also experiencing those things, and it's very liberating. And so every day, yeah.
Talk about that piece of finding or forming community in your life around the work you do.
Well, I would be nothing without my community. And I guess because I was separated from my parents at such a young age, I could have gone there were two directions for me to go on, and I decided to ask for help. And I think that's one thing growing up like I did, or if you're a kid who grew up without parents, whether through incarceration or deportation, you learn to fend for yourself, and you begin to think that you have to do everything by yourself and you cannot ask for help. And I think that's sort of a secret that we don't know, is that asking for help is a key to success. And I was able to reach out to my community in a variety of ways, reaching out to my teachers, taking advantage of every program that was available, and just asking my neighbors, just going up to them and saying, listen, this is my reality, this is what I'm living, can you help me? And here I am because I have reached out for help, and I know that my community is a key component to that.
But it sounds like there was some fear around that decision to reach out, whether it was in the shaping of community or in asking for help. What was at the root of that fear?
You start thinking, well, first, there's obviously trust issues. You don't know, when your world is shattered around you in a way where your parents are taken, this is the only home you know, this is the only security you know, everything else just seems like it's sort of setting up for failure as well. There's this, with all of that happening, you start doubting yourself and who you are in this world. So you start thinking you're not enough, you're not smart enough, and you're ashamed of who you are in your experience. So when you no longer are ashamed, when you reach out to people and they let you know that things are okay, that your experience shapes you, and that there is power from your experience, then things can change. But you definitely have that fear of people finding out that you're not enough, that people finding out that your life went awry. But when you start sharing who you are and allow others to share their lives and their stories, then you can find common ground.
I think what you're hitting on is really the power in sharing our personal experiences, because so often it's those experiences that allow us to find connection with one another, whether it is being separated from family members or this fear that you don't have a place at the table,
Yeah.
or just the learning how to reach out and ask for help. Those are common experiences, but so often when we talk about these various issues we all face, they're often defined by the differences between us.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like you found power in sharing your story.
Yes, and I continue to find power every day. I mean, when I first shared my story of being a daughter of undocumented parents and the fact that they were deported, I mean, before that, I hadn't done much research on it. I wasn't looking for other people who had experienced that because I was ashamed. And so, through the power of story and continuing to talk about this, even though it's uncomfortable, you learn that other people start becoming more comfortable with sharing their experiences, and it's a powerful thing. I mean, I've grown so much since I've shared my story in 2016 up until now, and I see the changes that have been made in our community with so many people sharing their opinions and how they feel about the world and the state of our country and what's going on. And I no longer feel that my opinions don't matter because other people are giving power to what they feel.
When I look across this room and I see so many faces of people who have the opportunity to connect with one another in really meaningful ways, I want you to talk about the importance of both finding mentors and actually acting as a mentor.
Well, it's been important to me because, like I said, I don't think I would be here without seeing the success of others who look like me. I think I've always tried to look for that around me. Is that who here has done what I want to do, and how can I also do that, but now with my own experience? And what if we get together and share those experiences together? What kind of work can we do? And I found so much power in that, in lending myself for that, and also accepting that. Accepting help and giving help are two different things, but they have to be done simultaneously.
How did you connect with people who could kind of guide you on the path you wanted to take?
Honestly, by being honest. Sometimes it's as simple as that. It's by being honest. And that's all I've ever wanted to do is tell the truth. That's all I've ever wanted from someone, is to tell me the truth. I didn't find that as a child. I was constantly being hid from reality or being lied to because I couldn't understand what was going on, or simply because I couldn't be honest with others. And so I found that once I was honest, people are attracted to that because people want honesty in their lives as well. And I think that in a world where we're just constantly being fed what is convenient, what people want to tell you so that you can go either this direction or that direction, we're craving for just the truth. And so I'm interested in history. I'm interested in the facts so that we can learn from those things and move forward.
When you think about the path your life has taken, and you think about people who are following their own paths of advocacy and activism, what advice would you have?
It's not easy. We know this to be true. I used to go to bed I used to go to bed so angry. And I didn't understand why. I used to go to bed so sad. I didn't know why, and it was because I felt helpless. Because even if I tried to care or understand one issue, there was always a million other issues that needed to be tended to, that needed to be understood, that needed to be helped. And I think that the minute that I realized that I could be an agent of change, that I could do everything in my power to change the world, and again, it's everything in your power, so whatever you can do that day, that is enough. It reminds me of three things that I've used for my life, and those are, it is resilience, respect, and revision. And resilience, because I know that there are a million roadblocks that are going to keep me down. I mean, we know that things are set up to be very hard. And every day you're going to experience that. You're going to get kicked. You're going to be told no. People are going to, there's going to be all these obstructions. And you have to understand that those are there. And you have to dust yourself off. I mean, not up, because you don't want any more dust. But you dust yourself off and you try again. So now I know that this is going to happen. But I'm going to keep on trying, because there are times where you grow, you succeed, you get a yes. But you have to be strong. Respect. I want to approach everything with respect because I want respect. I want to understand that people have histories, that I have a history. And we have to understand that people come with all sorts of problems, mental health issues, trauma that they're dealing with, and also trauma from generations and generations ago, right? What our ancestors have had to deal with, why the system is the way it is. And then revision, because this is a process. And we're not going to wake up tomorrow and know the answer. We have to try and fail and grow and experience. And so the work isn't ever done. And so that gives me a lot of strength to get up the next day and try again, to try to be better.
One of the things I've taken away from talking to you over the last couple of days is that in connecting your personal story to the work you've chosen to do as an immigration advocate, you've actually found some healing in that process.
Oh, yeah. Selfishly, yes. I've found healing. And that's why I tell people all the time, I'm like, no, you gotta care about others. It's the only way you're gonna heal. It's the only way you're gonna grow. Before I started doing this work, it was hard to talk to my family. Our family was broken, and it was tough to face that. And since I decided to share my experience with others and try to help out in a larger conversation, my personal life has improved significantly.
Well, Diane, it's been a pleasure. Diane Guerrero.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen and Diane. Our next speaker considers Chicago her home. As an Obama Foundation scholar at the University of Chicago, she's building on her work to fight violent extremism. As part of the Extremely Together initiative, founded by the late Kofi Annan, she has helped a network of peacemakers reach, get this, 2.5 million young people online with positive stories of change. Please join me in welcoming Fatima Zaman.
Hello, Chicago. How are you doing? Good. My name is Fatima Zaman, and I am a counter-extremist. I'll tell you what that means in just a second. But first, I'd like to tell you how I got here. On Thursday, 7th July 2005, I found myself in the wrong place at the wrong time. That day, I witnessed the most devastating terrorist attacks to ever face the United Kingdom. It was a normal day. I had got up and gone to school. I was sitting in class when I heard the loudest roar. Then came the sirens, repetitive, blaring, and deafening. Then came the silence. Sitting less than a few hundred meters from the blast, I was yet to comprehend what had happened. And as I watched the frenzy unfold around me, I realized London had been bombed. I had just seen terror at its peak, a direct attack on my community. In that moment, I saw what hate, anger, and violence can do when materialized inside a man-made contraption, a bomb. Never again, I said to myself. 7/7 was the first time violent extremism invaded my life. It scarred me, it affected me, and it formed the basis of every choice I have made in my formative years. Earlier, I told you what I do for a living. I'm a living, breathing counter-extremist. I became an activist not out of choice, but out of necessity. In almost every corner of East London, I heard radical voices. I saw violence and I saw hatred. I saw my community divided, cohesion disappear, and pave the way for a type of populism that seems to make reconciliation impossible. And so I decided it was my duty to take action. I was compelled to act for the sake of my faith, for the sake of my community, and for the sake of my country. While 7/7 was the event that tore my community apart, it is also the catalyst for all of my work. 13 years from the attacks, my work seeks to bring young people's involvement in violent extremism to an end. Now, de-radicalization isn't an exact science, but if I had to summarize it, I'd say it comes down to 3 P's: proximity, partnerships, and passion. Let us begin with proximity. And I don't mean that in the geographic sense. We've already learned over the last 2 days that communities can be both local and global, and that place is simply one aspect of human connectivity. In a similar vein, my approach to de-radicalization is based on peer-to-peer engagement, that I am closer to my peers in terms of age, culture, and creed, that I may be able to help them desist from engaging with extremist rhetoric. In 2016, I helped launch an initiative called Extremely Together. Touring communities across the UK, I have worked to disengage vulnerable young men and women from extreme violence. I've developed and delivered training programs that helps deconstruct and debate issues of identity, build resilience within communities, and strengthen the resolve of individuals to challenge and dispel extremist propaganda. This brings me to the next P, partnerships. Any meaningful attempt to bring someone back from the grips of terror can only be achieved if we understand their grievances. Often, validating a grievance is a simple yet powerful act of understanding grievance and empathy. Every time I work with a young woman who's willing to perpetrate violence, I know she's harboring a feeling of frustration, a genuine feeling of anger that, left unchecked, has been exploited by extremist groups, where she is left to feel her only choice in life is extreme violence. Now, I know this because I felt the exact same anger when extremists attacked my home. By understanding grievances and debunking the prestige that extremists attach to violence, I am able to support her recovery out of radicalization. I'm able to radically include her in our community. It is passion that I come on to next. And it is passion which has allowed me to rebuild my community by relying on the power of ordinary people to do some of the most extraordinary things. My work has shown me that when you combine the resourcefulness of people with the power of place, you can rapidly remedy the root causes of violent extremism. And this isn't because I figured out the key to de-radicalization, although I hope. Rather, my approach is more universal. It can be applied to education, reformative justice, and social advocacy. So next time you're troubleshooting a crisis, take a moment to think and ask yourself, how can I influence my proximity, enhance my partnerships, and use my passion to deconstruct the silos that exist within different groups of people? Sometimes you need to be in the right place at the right time to truly realize your position in this world. The factors that converged on 7/7 have allowed me to see what was wrong, to go on and build what is strong. It is often uncommon hope and uncommon stories in the most uncommon of places that have the power to change the world. And so as I close, I leave you with a sentiment. My former mentor, the late Kofi Annan, would often tell me, if not now, then when? If not us, then who? And if not here, then where? Thank you very much.
A huge thank you to Fatima for so powerfully sharing your story. So from one incredible young woman to another, I am thrilled to introduce the young poet, Pat Frazier. A Chicago native, she is a teaching artist at Young Chicago Authors and the first national poet laureate from the Second City. Pat, you're up.
How y'all doing tonight? I am thrilled to be here and to share the story of 3 places that are near and dear to my heart. I want to start with a poem that is about the place where I grew up, the Ida B. Wells housing projects. I was born there. I lived there until I was 9 years old, around the time it was torn down. I wrote my first book about that place and about not being able to go back to my childhood, about how it feels when your friends are able to return to their childhood homes, but all you have is a plane. This is called What to Do When the Wells is Turned into a Facebook Group. Go to church and pray. Thank the Lord for finally getting rid of the police cameras. Log into your childhood home and be grateful for thick walls. Now you can argue in the privacy of a direct message. Now you can post on the block and not watch your back. Now shorty who said it was poppin' the next time she see you gotta send a friend request. Ain't this the life? A play date in the comfort of your bedroom. No more waiting on the front porch of purgatory. Daddy always shows up when you type in his name. A vigil is just comments under a digitized obituary. We are still dying, but in better places. Shit. If I knew this was the price I had to pay for permanence, I would have stopped going outside a long time ago. Who needs liberation when your prison is comfortable? Thank you. Thank you guys so much. The second poem I'm gonna do is about a place where I just moved. It's my first apartment, and when you move into your first apartment, thank you. When you move into your first apartment, it's supposed to be a celebration, right? That's not what it was for my family because of the location that I moved, which was weird to me because all my life I had grown up moving from place to place in Chicago and listening to people talk about the neighborhoods in which I lived in negative ways, and I just didn't see that. And it was weird for me to move into this new place that now my family was talking about in this negative way. This is a poem for 71st and Wabash. The block a loose square, packed like sardines. Loose screw people keep up the pace. People know a street light's bedtime like a backhand road. People know parole don't keep the cartels sleep. Moms say we're sick for picking a block with such a backstory. The building shot up last year before demolition. The uneven foundation of my body could be swept away by a storm of smoke powder as I'm left gasping for fair housing rights. At least I know my neighbor's name, her perm waving a stiff hello from the front porch or the window of her bedroom where she watches the building swell fat with broke young people, pockets too thin to notice the blood waiting to escape my veins, to rep his set once he hits the street air, the boy on the corner who could trigger initiation, the woman with the nice garden who makes sure he won't. Since I moved here, I walk twice as fast because of what my family tells me about this patch of Chicago land, a city caught in the wrong throat. I walk like I don't know how quickly saliva decomposes, like I don't know how quickly a mouth can swallow a whole people before even checking for nutritional value, before even knowing the block's name, all the words that make Park Manor a home. Thank you. Thank you guys so much. I have one last poem. This poem is just dedicated to the place that hopefully we all know so well, and if you are not from here, hopefully this poem is a great introduction. It's called I Am Windy City, after Jane Cortez's I Am New York City. I am Windy City. Here is my tomato head baton scattered badge in blue. I got my cousin's ears of corn gentrifying in the melting pot. My mouth a mercury lake I baptized John Baptiste in a barn fire. I am Windy City of red meat, stocked yards of men in factories, inside my belly a jungle of segregated joints. Rub my navy pores with the blood of betadine boys, making steel and stealing it. I am Windy City of Cabrini green giants. Hear my Newport throat croak an 8-hour workday. A Haymarket rally in the projects, pipe bomb at Pullman's Pied Piper. I work for no one. I am Windy City of bloody gums. My teeth, a collection of patina-coated churches. My Ferris wheel earrings, too Chicana for the rest, the white-ass Illinois. My boys cleansed the white city with a storm of gunpowder tears. I am Windy City, only dressed in white on Valentine's for all my lovers massacred at the hands of Chirac, a man I don't know who keeps trying to wife me. Chirac is boo-boo the fool and foolish who bull with peeping toms who have license to strip search. Chirac turned churches into resale gun stores. Chirac, a trap song serenade sung into the wrong ear. Chirac, city of lost, boys under the hood. Chirac could never take my face value of royal flush in the Chicago River, my leaning Sears tower of pizza, my Heineken and soul food, gout feet tap dancing barefoot with my hot-headed friends, my confetti flesh comrades. Come, break bread with me. Thank you.
I got my first job in public service and community organizing on the south side of Chicago. I was elected to my first office on the south side and became president because of the south side of Chicago. If we're building a world-class institution, this could anchor a transformation of the South Side to create more jobs, more business opportunities, more hope. It would send a message to young people on the South Side that you count, that you matter. That's why we wanted it here on the South Side.
From the energy in the room, I can pretty much guess that all of us are waiting to visit this incredible presidential center. And so our final conversation of the day is between two Chicago Bulls fans who just happened to write memoirs at relatively young ages. One had just lost both his parents in quick succession to cancer, and had to grow up quickly to raise his younger brother. The other had just finished serving as the first African-American president of the Harvard Law Review and was grappling with the emotional inheritance of a father he barely knew. But before that conversation, we have a very special guest, one more young woman from right here in Chicago who discovered her love of written word in the back of Secret Agent Supply Shop in Wicker Park. Please help me welcome Esperanza Rivera.
Hi, my name is Esperanza Rivera. I'm 15 years old and a lifelong Chicagoan. Chicago is a place where there are many great and different opportunities to be able to share your talent and do what you love. But I believe you have to be able to get your voice out there in order to be heard. Now, sometimes getting your voice out in the world feels impossible because of fear of being judged or ridiculed for what you want to do. I used to be the same way. I hesitated sharing my writing and ideas with others in fear of being harshly judged, until I came across 826 Chicago. I've been writing with 826 since I was in the 3rd grade. As an 8-year-old, when I first heard that I'd be going somewhere after school to do more homework, you can imagine I was not so sure. I didn't know then that stories can change the world, let alone a story that I had written. On my 3rd day at 826 Chicago, we were asked to write about how we felt about President Obama being elected. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to write. I felt safe and at ease now that somebody who had many different plans to help people in need was going to be the president. Now, I'm a sophomore in high school, still attending 826 Chicago, where I've learned not only about the power of writing stories, but also about the power of listening to other stories. As a student there, I have been given many different opportunities to do things that I would have never imagined doing. My writing has been published 18 times. I've been nominated and accepted as one of the City of Chicago 2017 Rising Stars. And the main thing that I've done that still seems unreal to me is being selected as Chicago's representative at the International Congress of Youth Voices in San Francisco last summer. At this event, co-founded by Dave Eggers, young writers and activists from across the world gathered and worked on plans and ideas to make an impact on the world and the people around us. We worked together to write a manifesto, which included our vision for making positive change in the world. And I didn't hold back. I wrote about violence and the fear it gave me when I was apart from my family, and the unfair society norms that many people are expected to live by. I wrote everything that I had in me, hoping that someone out there would read it and feel the same way I do about the problems our world faces and how young people can help solve them. I wrote things I knew I wouldn't have the courage to say out loud, which is why I'm grateful for 826 Chicago and for the International Congress of Youth Voices for bringing me out from the wall I always hid behind. The confidence I've built as a writer is helping me encourage others to tell their stories, to write courageously, and to have hope for the future. I am proud to be here today to introduce you to author Dave Eggers, who is the co-founder of both the 826 movement around the world and the International Congress of Youth Voices. He is joined by someone I admire very much. The reason we are all here today, please give a warm round of applause for the 44th President of the United States, President Obama.
keep clapping, right? We could do that a little while longer.
Hello, Chicago.
How great was Esperanza? What were you doing at 15?
I wasn't doing that. I misspent my youth. And whenever I'm in these groups, it reminds me that I was, yeah. We won't go into all the details.
The Esperanza and the students from around the country wrote a book of letters to you. Did you ever see this? And it was called Thanks and Have Fun Running the Country. It was published, all the letters came out in the last few weeks after you got elected, and they were so excited that they couldn't hold back. And they wrote this book, and it was published, some of it was excerpted in the New York Times op-ed page. And I told the kids, of course the president's going to read your words.
You did.
And they fully believed it, but we didn't have proof until one day we saw a photograph of you on the tarmac near Air Force One, and it was a widely disseminated photo because you had dropped your BlackBerry and exploded into 12 pieces, but in your hand was the Times op-ed page that day with their letters to you.
You see?
And then when we told the kids, we saw, the president read your letters, they said, duh, of course he's going to read my letters to him. That's why he's president. He has to pay attention.
That's exactly right.
Well, can we talk first about the theme of this year's summit? It came out of a resonant line in a speech of yours in 2008, where you said that we may have different stories, but we hold uncommon hopes. We hold common hopes. And how do we reconcile that at a time like this, which feels so divided?
Well, first of all, it is wonderful to see all of you. I've been watching backstage, and just the passion, the eloquence, the skills and fierce intelligence that's been on display has been remarkable. And I always sometimes I think that I set up this foundation just so I can hang out with cool people like you. It just gives me an excuse every once in a while. If I get discouraged, I say, well, you know what, I'll have a summit and then meet all these amazing young people, and then I'll feel better. And it worked. So I could not be prouder of all your work, and in fact, I am paying attention to what you do consistently. One way to answer this is maybe to think about me first coming to Chicago 32 years ago now. And I drove up Lakeshore Drive. Well, I drove over the Skyway. I'd only been to Chicago once when I did a big summer tour with my grandmother and my mom and my baby sister, who at that time was 2, and I was 11. The only thing I remembered about Chicago was we went to the Field Museum, and there were these shrunken heads in there, which, when you're 11, an 11-year-old boy, you're just like, I cannot believe that they actually have shrunken heads. Like they had brought them back, which I just thought was odd. Anyway, that's the only thing I remember. I also remember that they had a covered pool, which made no sense because in Hawaii, you don't cover your pool. Because I wasn't here during the winter, so it didn't make sense to me. Anyway, I get here, and my job as this young green organizer was to work with communities that had been devastated by steel plant closings and communities that were being ravaged by rapid racial turnover, part of it deliberately set off by the real estate industry, because what would happen would be they would go around to white neighborhoods in Chicago and they'd say, black people are moving in here and your property values are going to go down real quick, so you better leave. We're willing to give you this price right now. And so folks would sell at a fire sale price, and then they'd jack it up and sell it to the African American community. And the turnover was very rapid. Michelle's community is one of them. You can see her, she still has her class pictures from like when she's in first grade, second grade, third grade, and you can see each year what starts off as an integrated classroom become entirely African American. And so I'm raring to go, and I am intent on changing the world, and I've been inspired by civil rights figures like John Lewis and Bob Moses and Diane Nash, and I'm going to lead the revolution. And the person who had hired me said, the only thing you're going to do for the first month is you're going to go around and meet people and ask them about their stories. And you're going to sit there and listen. And at the end of the month, I want you to tell me about the people you met. I said, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. But I did it. And during the course of that month, I was meeting with aging Irish priests who had seen their parishes devastated. And I was meeting with single African-American moms who were worried about violence and their kids getting into gangs. And I was meeting with a wide range of people. And what you started learning over time was that everybody had a story. Everybody's story was sacred in the sense that there was an essence to them, and their parents and their grandparents and how they thought about their world and what values motivated them, and it turned out that if you listened closely enough, if you just asked, people could tell you something really profound about their lives and the world that they had grown up in. And when you listened to enough of these stories, you started seeing all these weird connections and how they overlapped and recurring themes. And the reason the exercise was so powerful was, number one, by having those conversations, you found at the end of that conversation that you had a different relationship with that person than if you had just gone in and said, I want to talk to you about the gang problem or the housing problem or what have you. You had a sense of something shared. But the second thing you suddenly realized was there's actually a community here, it's just nobody knows it. And it changed the nature of my job, which is what I realized my job actually was to get people to just recognize each other and how they were linked together. And if I could do that effectively, then I now had the power, the collective power, to actually get the alderman to clean up a vacant lot, or to get the police to be more responsive, or to get the schools to have after-school programs. So I guess the idea of each of us having very unique, specific stories, but that if we bother listening to each other, that those stories merge and blend, and that there's a community to be unearthed. It's already there. I learned very early on, and it served me all the way through the presidency. I think the reason we don't see that or feel that now is because it does require you to listen to others. And the way now our media is structured, and the way we get information, and the way we see each other, is there are all these filters, right? And it's very hard to get through those filters. So part of my job as president, part of my job now, part of your job now, presumably, is to be able to get, to wipe the windshield, with all the stuff that's on there so that people can see clearly. And that's hard to do because there's, not only is it inherently difficult sometimes to see people who look different or have different stories, come from different places, but it's also hard when you have entire industries that are built and designed to make people think they're different and that they're set against each other and that their interests automatically conflict.
Well, there's that great Dave Issei quote. He started StoryCorps, and listening is an act of love. And I feel that anytime you sit down and give somebody a couple hours of your time just to listen, and any story that you assume you know is complicated in the most beautiful way, right? We published a book called High Rise Stories about residents of Cabrini Green and the Robert Taylor homes that growing up here, and all of you that grew up here, you know, you're told things in the media about it, but when you actually listen for 5-6 hours and let somebody shape their narrative and own it and then have it published exactly right, it's a whole different thing, you know? And all of those stories, were radically different than the ones we were told, you know, in these short bits in the media. But I want to go back to this time of, well, division, and also sort of this question of citizens, what are our responsibilities and powers as citizens, you know? And you went from community organizer to president and now back to private citizen. And do you see power in a different way? You know, your famous line was that the most important office is that of a citizen. But then there's barriers to civic engagement. I mean, how do you make people feel like full participants in their societies or democracies?
Well, that's part of what everybody here is trying to figure out, right? Here's the interesting thing that happens when you're president, or when you go through the experience of being president. So you start off, you know, you're a community organizer and you're struggling to try to get people to recognize each other's common interests, and you know, you're trying to get some project done in a small community, and you start thinking, okay, you know what, this alderman's a knucklehead, and you know, they're resistant to doing the right thing, and so I need to get more knowledge, more power, more influence so that I can really have an impact. And so you go to the state legislature and you look around and you say, well, these jamokes, I mean, not all of them, but I'm just saying, you know, you start getting that sense of, this is just like dealing with the alderman, right? So, no, I got to do something different. So then you go to the U.S. Senate and you're looking around and you're like, oh, man. And then when you're president, you're sitting in these international meetings, and it's like the G20, and you got all these world leaders, and it's the same people, which is really interesting. Same dynamics, you know, it's just that there's a bigger spotlight, there's a bigger stage, but I'm only partly joking about that. The nature of human dynamics does not change from level to level, you know, which is why I've been quoted saying this sometimes, like most of what you need to learn, you can actually just read Dr. Seuss, right? Because, you know, there's the story of the Sneetches, and like, people, the Sneetches have, the ones with stars think that they're better than the ones who don't have stars, and they got an attitude. And then, you know, there's the Lorax who's trying to tell people, hey, don't cut down the trees because then the fish are going to die, right? I mean, it's all pretty much there. And the reason, the reason this is important, there's a serious point here. I think we make the mistake of thinking oftentimes that the venue or the status of particular institutions or the levels that you're at, that somehow things work differently there. Well, they don't, right? One way to think about power is that there is a way of thinking about power that's very hierarchical, right? And it basically says, you know, you got room for one person on top, and then, you know, it's a pyramid, and it descends, and then you got the folks at the bottom who really got no say. And then there's a model that says, well, it's a little, hopefully more of a circle in which we all contribute something. We all have a voice. It doesn't mean that there's no order involved, but it means that to the extent that some have more authority to make decisions than others, it's been earned. There's consent. It's not by virtue of power, right? Or it's not just by virtue of force, or I'm bigger than you, so you got to do what I say, or I got more money than you, so you got to do what I say, but rather it's because everybody agrees that somehow I'm giving voice to or articulating or weaving together our common aspirations. Now, for most of human history, the hierarchies were very firm, very set, and it was what it was. If you were on the losing end of some conquest, if you were a woman in a patriarchal society, if you were a peasant, if you were broke, then those things were set. And one way to imagine and understand human progress is that over time, the folks who were at the bottom started realizing, I've got power, I've got skills, I've got a voice, right? And over time, we developed this frustrating and difficult, but considerable improvement over the old ways called democracy, in which the starting premise was everybody has a voice. Everybody is equal under the law. And we understand that it didn't actually work that way, but just by virtue of that concept, it's a radical concept. And here in the United States and in other countries as well, but certainly over the course of 2.5 centuries here, interrupted by a civil war, we fought to make that real. And what that means is that our central experiment is based on the idea that each of us has power, and that we win that power through consent. And if I can persuade you that I'm speaking on your behalf, that I'm representing your interests, that I am committed to a common vision, a shared story, then I have a certain number of followers, and then we try to figure out how to make all that work together. So now again, that's the idealized version, and there's always been blocks and barriers and hurdles and hypocrisy, and undergirding it has been violence in all sorts of ways. And yet, the story itself is one that has been powerful, has moved the world, has changed the world. And so the question now becomes, do we, in fact, use that power? And how do we exercise it? And at what levels? And part of the premise of the summit is that there are all kinds of different ways to use that power. Dave, when you write and then you created 826, and you have somebody like Esperanza who's coming in and telling her story, that's an exercise of power. That's a voice that has not been heard before. When Janelle sings some songs that surprise people and challenge people, that's an exercise of power. When some of the participants who've been on the stage discuss how they're going to get young women involved in STEM education who previously have been locked out, that's an exercise of power. So there are a lot of different forms. Ultimately, though, I do think that the institutions that regulate our lives in all kinds of ways, that those are real. You can't wish them away. And so there has to be some element of your voices and your power that translates into, where does tax money go? And how's the state, where does it build roads and schools? And is it actually doing something to make sure the trees don't get cut down? Like the Lorax is warning. Has the criminal justice system read the Sneetch's book to make sure that, they're not targeting folks who don't have stars on their bellies? And so that all requires then a joining together of power. The one thing that I learned very early on, and there are very few exceptions. Maybe you can argue Picasso or Einstein or Mozart, John Coltrane, Maybe there are a handful of folks whose power is so unique and fierce and blazes that they almost don't need an institutional framework for it to dazzle, to have impact. But even then, right? I mean, Picasso had to have a bunch of patrons who were willing to finance his work, and museums that were willing to show his work, and Shakespeare had to have somebody who could put on a show, and they had to sell tickets. And so the point is that there are few endeavors, human endeavors, that are worthwhile that you can do by yourself. I mean, ultimately, it's dependent on, it's supported by a community. So I guess the answer to your question is, if you want, the way power works at every level, at the United Nations or in your neighborhood, is, do you have a community that stands behind what you stand for? And if you do, you'll have more power. And if you don't, you won't.
Well, you had power after leaving the presidency. Your foundation, your goals after presidency could be a lot of things. You could have aligned yourself with one specific cause, but instead the focus of the foundation is creating and fostering and supporting a new global class of leaders. How did you come to that? How'd you settle on that as your...
Why did you decide to set up 826 instead of just holding away and writing some more books? Because you're expending some time working with young people who might end up being writers. Writing's hard, man. So I know right now I'm writing.
How's that going, by the way?
It's just brutal. I'm just sitting there. I type 2 words. I delete them.
So when can we expect this book? Is that
you know what? Michelle's out there. You can go buy her book right now. So, this is causing some strain in our marriage. The fact that she is finished and I am not. She's all got her feet up. That's all right. So, how's it going? Anyway. Why did you decide to do what you did?
Writing is incredibly lonely and sedentary, and my mom was a teacher, my sister was a teacher, and so a lot of my friends were teachers, and they said they needed more humans in the classroom. They needed more one-on-one attention, especially for English language learners. And so we just created an army of tutors that could serve that purpose. But what we all found was that the joy that we got out of it far exceeded whatever we put in. And so, and it's just like being in the Marriott these last few days, it's electricity in every room. And so that's why we created the International Congress of Youth Voices, putting people together and just watching the sparks fly. So anyway, you got to answer that question.
You just answered the question. I wanted to see the sparks fly. I think some may have heard me say this, but one thing you do learn in this journey that I took is that most of the problems that we confront in the world do not exist because we don't have good solutions to them. I mean, we don't have perfect solutions to them, but most of the time, the truth is, we actually know how to teach kids in an excellent school. And there is, in every city in America, I can't speak for the entire world, but in every city in America, you go to the poorest community, and you'll find one amazing school. Yeah, it's got like a 98% graduation rate, and everybody's in the chess club, and they put on plays, and the question is, well, why doesn't it scale up? Why is it this one school works? Why can't we have 50 schools in that same city that work? I can tell you right now how to, without spending huge amounts of money, increase agricultural yields in sub-Saharan Africa fourfold. Yeah, you go to my father's village, where my father was born, and you have these, some of the folks who are from Africa here can confirm this. You'll have these cornfields, like they got like one little droopy corn stalk for every like 3 steps. And well, why is that? If these countries can all feed themselves, what is it that's going on? Well, it's because maybe there's a civil war going on there. Maybe the farmers aren't getting fair prices for their grain, and so there's no incentive structures for them to get it to market and to improve agricultural yields because it's not going to make that much of a difference. With respect to the schools, it's because the human dynamics of the school board and the teachers union and taxpayers says it's not that important for us to have 50 great schools. Just one's enough. The point is that what prevents us from implementing most of the things that we would probably collectively agree would make the world better is not an absence of technical solutions. It's because there are humans involved. And that the dynamics of the society, do we really care about these kids? Because maybe we don't. They look a little bit different than us. And maybe we don't want to upend the social structure entirely. And we haven't had a real conversation about that. In a place like Africa, have we really resolved ethnic differences that arose out of colonial lines? And are we still making excuses for why we can't get our act together today? And our children suffer for it. Those are the things that block us. I mean, there are few exceptions. Climate change, we're going to have to come up with some new technologies to solve the problem as much as we need to. Although even on something like that, right now I could take off-the-shelf existing technologies. We could reduce carbon emissions by, let's say, 30%. Without any, it's not like we'd all have to go back to caves and, live off, fire. We could have electricity and smartphones and all that stuff, which would buy us probably another 20, 30 years for that technological breakthrough that's necessary. The reason we don't do it is because we are still confused, blind, shrouded with hate, anger, racism, mommy issues. Yeah, I mean, we are fraught with stuff, and so if that's the case, then the single most important thing that we have to invest in is not all, and look, I'm a huge supporter of science and technological research and social science and evidence-based learning and all that good stuff. People call me Spock for a reason. I believe in reason and logic and all these Enlightenment values. But the thing that really we have to invest in is people. We got to get people to figure out how they work together in a, how do we get people to work together in a cooperative, thoughtful, constructive way? And that's where you all come in. And by the way, it is something that can be taught, not perfectly, because we're never going to get completely rid of all of our stuff. But we can improve. There are certain ways of thinking about how we organize ourselves and how our society organizes ourselves and how we communicate and how we work together that lead to better outcomes, that lead us to a better place. And that's what I wanted to invest in because I think that the payoff there ends up being much higher.
I met one of the attendees, John Talia. He's at Arizona State
Where's
University.
John?
Where's it? There he is.
Hey, John.
So John's at ASU, but he's from Ghana originally. And we had dinner last night, and we were talking about he's starting a project back in his hometown in Ghana, an agricultural project, and we were talking about scale. How do you start on a very small scale? You don't have to think about 10 years from now. You don't have to think about raising $1 million, but starting on a small scale, showing progress, working it incrementally, showing impact in the community, and going from there. Can you talk to all these young activists about not being succumb to their first setbacks, knowing that it's going to be a long process, and that something doesn't have to be global overnight to have an impact that's meaningful?
Yeah, I mean, one of the mistakes I think we all make, and I made it, is to think that this is easy, and to believe that societies change in accordance with our timetables. And the example I always use, because I think it underscores the nature of the work ahead for all of you, is just the civil rights movement here in the United States, which I'm most familiar with. So the Civil War is fought. I won't even go pre-Civil War. Just start in the Civil War, in which you have the post-Civil War constitutional amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which end slavery and declare that everyone is entitled to equal protection under the law. And it takes 100 years, essentially, from the time of those civil rights amendments, for that principle even to be affirmed by the Supreme Court of the United States. And that requires a movement that didn't start, by the way, in Birmingham or Selma, but started with Ida B. Wells trying to stop people from getting lynched, and it started with Charles Hamilton Houston crafting elaborate legal strategies that they're working case by case, state by state, until they're finding the optimal case that they might take to the Supreme Court. And in the interim, it is requiring activists in small communities all throughout the South and the North who are just fighting what looks like a local fight, but one that is part of the mosaic of this broader pattern that's emerging. All right, so then you get the Civil Rights Act of 1964, you get the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And it then takes another decade and a half for that to actually start realizing itself in African American voting rights in the South, approximating what the general population's voting rates are, and elected officials being elected. And we're still in that battle. And you've now just gone through 4, 5, 6, 7 generations. Now, that can seem exhausting and depressing. But in the scope of human history, it's actually kind of shocking, that because the truth of the matter is that you can't find a lot of other examples in human history where a minority group that was that subjugated has made as much progress and survived and thrived in some cases, and frankly put its entire stamp on the culture under such circumstances. And look, I mean, when you look at what has happened with LGBT rights, it's happened even faster. This is always a dangerous thing when you say, I'm not that old, to this room, but I'm not that old, people. But look, the idea of being openly gay when I was in high school was, that wasn't on the agenda. And in the span of my lifetime, that transformation has been extraordinary, right? So the point is that, one of the things I always tell the folks who work with me is you have to maintain two seemingly contradictory ideas in your head at the same time. One is you should be extraordinarily impatient about the injustices and nonsense and foolishness that you see around you. And you should be finding opportunities at every juncture to challenge those things. And you have to, at the same time, keep in your mind that societies are these incredibly complex, organic things that you don't turn switches on, right? They evolve, and they shift, and they change, and they move in unexpected ways. And sometimes you're going to go forward for a good period of time, and then you're going to slip back, and you're going to take a detour. And I was talking to a friend of mine backstage who, this is a conversation I often have around here lately, which is they're feeling depressed about where's the course of the country and the world going. And, what I had to remind them is, look, this is what happens in societies. We get the New Deal and everybody's feeling pretty good unless, you're a Japanese person who got interned after Pearl Harbor, or unless you're one of the black domestic workers who were excluded from Social Security because the Dixiecrats legislated that you and agricultural workers couldn't participate in Social Security. Right? So you didn't feel as good about the New Deal. Now, does that erase the extraordinary achievement of the New Deal in Social Security and the start of Medicare and the modern welfare state in the United States? No, it doesn't negate it, but it does mean it wasn't a straight path. It was a sideways path. And, you move like a crab through, but hopefully you're going forward. That maybe is not the most elegant image, but I think I stole that from Ralph Ellison. I think he talks about how history moves sideways. We got some authors in the room. You guys can fact check that.
We got to talk about Chicago.
Yes, we do.
First of all, our Khalil Mack's Bears going to the Super Bowl.
You know what? The Bears look pretty good, but that's a whole nother conversation. No. I mean, I know there's some Arizona people, so don't even talk about your football team right now. Go ahead. What else we got?
Well, you've said that your story was only possible in Chicago. Why come back to the South Side where you started? And I want to say, first of all, I saw your last speech at UIC, and I was interviewed maybe 50 people. Everybody was competing for how far back they went with you. First campaign, I met a woman last night, Pat DeBonnet. Where's she?
Hey, Pat.
There you are. She's 77 years old.
Hey, Pat.
And goes back with you to Roseland.
Absolutely.
And there's a sense of continuity in your life about making everybody that you've known in all these stages of your life is still here.
Yeah.
And Pat told me a million stories last night. So tell me about you in Chicago and why this is all happening here.
Well, I don't see how I could build a presidential center anywhere else. This is the place where I found my calling, found my voice, started my political career. Most importantly, this is the place that produced my wife and produced my children. So some of it is just personal connections. I mean, this is not where I grew up, but this is where I discovered who I was. All right, this is where all the different strands of me that I'd been wrestling with all my life cohered. Right? And I emerged from here a whole person as opposed to pieces of a person. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, I just mean that young people, part of the nature of being young is you've got all these parts that are kind of, I mean, it's like suddenly you're a foot taller, and well, how does that work? And your voice gets deeper, and you try on different poses, and do I look cute here? And you know what I'm talking about. I mean, that's part of becoming who you are if you're lucky. And this is what forged me. It forced me to ask a bunch of questions about what's fundamentally important to me and what do I want to commit myself to, and what do I believe. What are those parts of myself that are most essential, and that I'm willing to risk everything for. That's where I began to figure this out. I came here a boy. I left here a man. So that was important. But beyond me, Chicago is this extraordinary laboratory because it is, I believe, the quintessentially American city. And that's no insult to any other cities. But New York, which I love, LA, I love. There are cities around the country, from Austin to Seattle, that are extraordinary cities. But Chicago is sort of where the trains meet. And you've got east and west and north and south. Demographically, the state of Illinois actually approximates the United States better than any other state in the country in terms of its ethnic and religious and racial mix. Here in Chicago, you've got Chicago has the second largest Polish community in the world, right? I mean, after Warsaw, this is like the second largest collection of Polish people, which is, you go up to Devon Avenue and it's just Indian folks everywhere. And then you go to Pilsen Little Village and it's an entire, right? So you have the world is converging here in this powerful, amazing way. And then you have an African-American community that represents the great migration from south to north. And this is where you started seeing the blues and jazz and chess records and rock and roll, and you started seeing black politics emerge on a national level that you had not seen before, with people like Ralph Metcalf and Congressman Dawson, and then Harold Washington, who in turn inspired people like me and Jesse Jackson to run for president. And you had black businesses like Ebony and Jet and Saul Sheen, which, ladies, those of you who are concerned about your hair care products, that's where this got started. So and what's also true is that here you see all the pathologies of and contradictions of America: segregation and violence and extraordinary wealth, just smack dab next to extraordinary poverty. And so it forces you to see in who we are in all our glory, but also all our warts. I love Chicago, but more importantly, I think that it gives us a place to tell this larger story that I'm describing. And it's not unique to Chicago. It's just that it is a place that I'm familiar with, that Michelle and I know very well, and that we owe a great debt to. But it's also one that I think speaks to the larger story and contest of ideas that exist around the world. What does it mean for ordinary people to try to mobilize for a better life? And how do they interact with older forms of power that try to crush their spirits and crush their voices and divide them? And how do we work through that? How do we make an economy that doesn't just work for some, but works for everybody? All those challenges that everybody here, whether you're from Bulgaria or Tucson or Mali, that's here, and so it becomes a great place to tell that story, but also to convene and gather people to examine how we can get beyond it.
Well, this gathering is just about over, and we're just about out of time, but when everybody goes back to Tucson and Bulgaria and Mali, what message do you want to send them home with?
Look, everybody here is just doing great. And I mean, I'm serious about this. The thing that inspires me every time I come to these gatherings, whether it's the full gatherings that we've had these last 2 years or the conversations that I had with your counterparts wherever I traveled around the world, is that this generation behind us is smarter, more sophisticated, more tolerant, more welcoming, more innovative, more creative, certainly than I was. And I'll go ahead and speak for my whole generation. I think, y'all are ahead of the curve. you're no less idealistic. In some ways, you're more idealistic. And you feel a greater sense of urgency about wrongs that need to be righted. You're also coming of age at a time when the existing social and institutional arrangements of our society have broken down in many ways, and the new ones have not risen up yet. Right? So it is important for workers to have a voice. In the United States right now, the labor movement represents around 7% of the private sector workforce. So it's up to somebody to reimagine what does a 21st century workers organization look like and give it voice. We have corporations that are extraordinarily innovative and powerful and are producing more wealth at a faster clip than any time in human history, with great benefits to all of us. And yet, these institutional arrangements, I think everyone recognizes, have concentrated wealth so much in the hands of a few and are increasingly leaving so many other people insecure that it's not a stable system or one that is likely to produce fulfilling, happy lives for people unless we make some modifications. And that's going to be up to some people out here to do that. We have schools that don't teach as well as they should. We've got governments that don't listen and don't work. We have media that seem to attract people's attention, whose business model is built on addicting them to this ADD, constant scattering of your attention, but that don't actually allow you to reflect and understand the forces that are shaping your lives. And it's going to be up to you to figure out how to refashion those institutions so they work. And that is a big project, and it is a heavy burden, but what a joyous burden that is. What an exciting thing to be a part of, to figure that out. Because, imagine if you were just born into a place that worked, what would you be doing with yourselves? But to have this grand adventure where you literally can remake the world right now because it badly needs remaking. And to be able to do that grounded in values that maybe you couldn't even have accessed 1,000 years ago, or 500 years ago, or 150 years ago. But when I say that the world needs remaking, I do want to leave you with the thought that there has been progress. It is not inevitable, but it is there. And I've said this to people before. If you had to be born at any moment in human history, and you didn't know ahead of time whether you're going to be black, white, Asian, Latino, but you didn't know whether you're going to be what country you were from, or you're male or female or gay or straight, then you just said, all right, well, you're blind. You're behind a veil. When do you want to be born? You choose now. or maybe 2 years ago, but so I'm teasing. That was a joke. But the point, but the point I'm making, the point I'm making is that is as a consequence of all that work that was done. That was done by not just the famous people, not just the politicians. It wasn't just Gandhi and Mandela and Dr. King and, Gloria Steinem and, it was this process of ordinary people feeling like this isn't right, and I want more room to breathe. I want more say in how I'm raising my kid. I want to. I want to feel as if the world is fair, and they fought for that space, and it produced this bumpy but upward trajectory, and it's not inevitable. It can go down. If you were living in Vienna in the 1920s, it would have been hard to imagine what would happen just 15 years later, 20 years later. Suddenly 60 million people are dead around the world, and the Holocaust has happened, and buildings, all of Europe's in rubble, right? So things can go backwards, but if you guys are working the way I think you're going to be working, then they're going to go forwards instead. All right?
We thank
Thanks,
President Barack Obama.
One last time, thank you to Dave Eggers and to President Barack Obama. And how about a little recognition for this amazing woman? Give it up for Najeen.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. It has been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.
Najeen has this wonderful ability to make things look super easy. I also want to recognize and have everybody here recognize anyone who stood on this stage over the course of the past 2 days and shared your story. Stand up so that people around you can see it.
It's been an incredible 2 days, hasn't it, David?
It so has been an amazing couple of days, and there are a couple of other groups of people that we need to appropriately recognize. First, to everyone who is here, who participated, who was vulnerable, who shared your story, and who is part of the Obama network, please give yourselves a big round of applause. To all of the members of the Obama Foundation team and staff and interns, thank you for your work. And while we have had a very intimate small group here in Chicago, I want to thank the tens of thousands of people who have joined us to watch online via live stream. Thank you for joining us here in Chicago.
And I think we could all agree that so much has happened off the main stage as well. As Dave called it, there have been sparks left and right. And so we hope so many of the connections that have been formed and the friendships that have begun will continue so that those collaborations can help us make all of our communities that much better.
And so to Nadine and to the rest of us, before we part here in this space, I want everybody to take in the person next to you, the people who are part of your communities here, the stories that you have exchanged, the vulnerability that you have shown, the strength and the commitment that you have launched. All of you today are part of this Obama network. And as you go forward to do the work that you're going to continue to do, I want you to be mindful of the lessons that you have learned today, of the common hopes and the uncommon stories. And I want you to root your work in some words of the 44th President of the United States, and remember them deeply. Change doesn't happen if we wait for some other person or for some other time. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. All of you have a responsibility to make those words come true. So let's get to work, and I'll see everybody next year. Thanks, everybody.